Thank you for watching this sermon today. We hope you enjoy it, and we hope it's a blessing to you. If New Life Community Church has impacted your life in a positive way, we would love to know about it. There's an email address just at the bottom of the screen. If you would like to support the work of New Life Community Church financially, we would welcome that. We don't expect it, but we would welcome it. And you can do that safely and securely electronically through the homepage of our website. And again, the web address for that is right here. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the sermon. Our prayer is that it would really be a blessing in your life. I want to talk this morning from the last sermon in a series of sermons called Greener Pastures. And I want to start this morning with a brief reading of Scripture that I'm going to come back to over and over again in this particular sermon. It's from Proverbs. I have another passage I'm going to reference from Thessalonians, but this is from Proverbs chapter 29, verse 25. And it says this, it says, fear of man, and I think we could say today fear of man or woman, because there are some scary women out there, let's be honest. I'm just kidding. But fear of man will prove to be a snare. Fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord will be kept safe. And today what I want to talk about, the theme that I want to talk about is the greener pasture. Can we get the sermon slide up? I don't know where the AV person went, but just one over to the other side because I think visuals help. Greener, it's not there? Really? Okay, never mind. Forget I said that. Those of you who've been the last few weeks, think of the cow in the pasture. Oh, it's on the bulletin cover, yeah. So everybody look at your bulletin if you have one, greener pastures. The idea is that a lot of times in life, things may be good in our lives, things may be okay, may be acceptable, but if we just kind of look over there, it looks like it could just be a little bit better if this changed or that changed. And so the examples have been things like, a lot of times the greener pasture is if I just had a little bit more money. So if I just got that raise or I just got that new job, even though the one we currently have is pretty good, it could always be better. And so we look with envy on the next, if I could just, we may be in a great relationship with our spouse or with our kids, but if my relationship could just be like their relationship, and we hold up some greener pasture. And today I want to talk about the greener pasture of approval of others. We may be doing just fine, but we think if I could just get that person, my boss, my spouse, my kids, my parents, if I could just win their approval, then everything would be okay and my life would come together and I would have no more problems. And so I want to talk about the greener pasture, the elusive pursuit of approval. And that's when you're constantly asking questions like, do you like me? Because I want to be liked. Am I okay? Because I need you to think I'm okay. It's not just how I feel, but I need your affirmation. What do you think of me? Because I want to know what you think, because what you think is more important than anybody else in the world at this moment. And when we get hung up on pleasing people or seeking the approval of others, it's one of the surest ways of losing track of staying focused on the approval of God. When we get hung up, I want to say that again because I want to make sure you get it, because this is like the sermon. If you forget everything else, get this one line. When we get hung up on seeking the approval and craving the approval, because this is different from, and I talked about this a few weeks ago, I don't mean caring what other people think. The people who don't care what anybody else thinks are kind of sociopathic and you want to stay away from them. That's dangerous. But this is like craving it, desiring it, obsessing over it, not caring what they think, but needing their approval. And when you fall into the trap of needing the approval of one particular person or everybody out there, it's one of the surest ways of losing sight of the fact that God has already approved you, and of functioning off of God's approval. And so I want to make approval seeking is caring what everybody thinks. It's craving the approval. It's obsessing over approval. It's do you like that picture I posted? Because I posted a picture on Instagram 5 minutes ago and it didn't get any likes. Do you like it? Do you care? Why am I so lonely? That's approval seeking. Approval seeking is, are we okay? Because I need for us to be okay, because my life won't be complete unless you and I are okay. That's approval seeking. Approval seeking is, I texted you and you didn't respond. How come you didn't respond? I saw the bubbles at the bottom of the text. I need you to respond. That's approval seeking. Approval seeking is being unable to say no, even when you know that you should say no. Approval seeking is the Girl Scouts show up to sell Girl Scout cookies. You have diabetes. How many boxes did you buy? Because you can't say no. Approval seeking is getting invited to that party you don't want to go. But what would people think if I wasn't there? That's approval seeking. And I would suggest to you this morning that approval seeking, at its root, it's rooted in fear, right? That's where the proverb leads us. It's the fear of man or the fear of woman. Usually it's the fear of a particular man or of a particular woman, because we often focus it on one person. Most people that I know don't struggle with this in all areas. They struggle with it in one place, or like there's some people who are perfectly willing to stand up for themselves and their families, but at work they never say a word, because they're so afraid of what people will think. There's some people that are great at standing up for themselves at work, but at church, they're like little church mice. They never say a word. They just kind of scurry here and there and hope never to be seen. There's some people that are good at standing up for themselves in church, but in their families, they would never say something to old Aunt so-and-so, right? God does not want you to live in fear. God doesn't want you to live in fear of what they might say. God never wants you to live in fear of what they might do. God certainly doesn't want you to live in fear of what they might think if you don't do what they said to do. And again, it's been my experience that most people struggle with this in one area of life, even if they don't in all areas. Worrying about making sure that everyone approves of you is exhausting. It's emotionally exhausting, but it's also spiritually exhausting. And I think that's why God in Proverbs inspired whoever wrote that, maybe Solomon, inspired him to say, to give this advice that fear of man, fear of human beings, proves to be a snare, right? But there's also good news, because that's the bad news. Fear of people proves to be a snare. But there's good news because it gives a solution. Fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord, whoever trusts in God, whoever puts their faith in Jesus and looks to God for their approval, that person will be kept safe. Now, what does this mean? Does it mean that you never get sick if you seek God's approval? Does it mean that you never get hurt, that nobody ever says anything mean to you? You never have to answer for anything? No. It means that you have a spiritual joy. You have a freedom in Christ. And the reason is, and I want you to understand this, because people can be mean. Individuals and groups. People can have a bad day. Individuals and groups. People can do and say things that we would be embarrassed if everybody else knew. And so if you're seeking the approval of people, it's like, it's like playing the lottery. You're not likely to win. Somebody's going to get you. If you're trying to prove, if your goal is to seek the approval of your boss, when your boss's spouse yells at him or her before they go to work, you may well get the brunt of that. And you have no control over it. So seeking approval of people is a dangerous game, but seeking the approval of God, or resting, I should say, in the approval of God, will set you free. And the reason is because God has approved you already, right? You can't always please people, but you can always please God. In fact, you already have pleased God. You are already approved by God. You are already loved by God. He demonstrated that, showed it, sealed it in the most dramatic of ways possible in human history. When Jesus died on the cross for you, it was a way of saying, you are worthy of me dying. You are given salvation. You are redeemed. You are healed. You are approved. You are enough. And so when we look to God for approval, the reason that frees us is because God always says yes. Do you understand that? It's so powerful. I'll tell you where this approval seeking, one of the places it shows up that is most disturbing that you see from time to time. It shows up, and I don't mean to pick on parents because I'm one of you, but it shows up in I don't know if this is true throughout history, but it shows up a lot in modern parenting, right? Because we're running around, we're feeling so stressed, we're trying to make our kids like us instead of trying to raise good kids. I saw this play out this week in Walgreens. I was in Walgreens, and there's a dad, God bless his heart, because I've been there, I know exactly. He's got a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. And he asked the 3-year-old, is it okay if we wait to get mommy's prescription filled? Is it okay? He was asking permission from his 3-year-old to do what his wife had told him to go to Walgreens and do. Have you ever been in this situation? Do you know how the 3-year-old answers? They don't say yes or no. They act out no with a firmness that cannot be resisted. So this kid immediately climbs up on a chair, jumps off the waiting room chair. He's all over the place, pulling medicine off the shelves and stuff like that. And you can just see the countenance of the father just crashing. I felt bad for the guy. I've been there. Is it okay? This was mine. Is it okay if I put you in the car seat now, honey? Rah! You know. Do you guys want to brush your teeth? I've never known a kid in the history of the world that said, yes, please, more toothbrushing, please. Do you want to take a bath? Now, there comes a day when they'll stay in the bath for hours, but do you want to take a bath when they're an infant? Ah! It's like asking your dog, do you want to take a bath? No way. I heard a mom once ask her daughter, I kid you not, this is a true story. I heard a mom, and it was probably Target or something like that. Is it okay if I ground you? Yes, please, more punishment. I will take more punishment for 10, please. And I know some of the parenting theories, and I think they're probably right, that suggest that it's good to give your kids choices because it builds character and builds self-esteem and builds strength. But you've got to be careful about what you give, what choices you give, parents. You've got to be careful. Like, instead of, would you like to brush your teeth, the choice should be red toothbrush or blue toothbrush, right? It's not like, do you want to go to church? The choice is, do you want to go now or in 2 minutes, right? Do you want to go to bed? The choice is not, do you want to go to bed, ever? The choice is, do you want to go now or in 5 minutes, right? Because, but what happens is that we want the approval of our children. We want our children to like us. We're fearful that they may not like us. And so we ask them these questions that they were never designed to be able to answer properly at this age. And so what we do is we confuse them, we confuse the relationship, and it makes it almost impossible to set healthy boundaries. That's just one way that approval seeking plays itself out in our world. The antidote, get your approval from God. It will enable you to be a better employee. It will enable you to be a better boss. It will enable you to be a better parent. It will enable you to be a better child, a better brother, a better sister. It just frees us up to do what we know is right, even when what we know is right may cost us something in a relationship. Paul said it wonderfully in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. So if you have a Bible, turn there. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, it's a letter written by Paul. It's probably... scholars think it's one of the earlier letters he wrote. And in this particular case, he's talking about evangelism, and people are impressed by how bold he has been able to be in his evangelism. And can you not relate to this? Like, evangelism is hard. And there are tons of times where I sort of feel like, and I'm sure you feel like this too occasionally, where you're like, I should reach out to that person. I should offer Christ's love to that person. But you're like, yeah, but they may not appreciate me reaching out. And so you keep your mouth shut. I think Paul faced this because he says this in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, beginning with verse 4. It's on, it's on page 956 in the church Bibles. He says, we speak as those approved by God. In other words, if we were just trying to make friends and influence people, we probably wouldn't say anything because it's often safer to keep your mouth shut. But he said, we preach or speak as those approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel. We're not trying to please people, but God, who tests our hearts. You know that we never use flattery, right? So if you're in sales, one of the things you learn is use flattery Because it works on people, it will create, but if you do that, you have to, you sacrifice the truth a little bit. He says, we never used flattery, nor did we put on a mask to cover up greed. God is our witness. We were not looking for praise from people, not from you or anyone else. I just want you to think about how freeing it would be if you could let that seep deep down into your soul. If you knew that you were enough, if you knew that you were valuable, if you knew that you were created as you are by a God who loves you. And so you could care what other people think, but you would never have to be obsessed with pleasing them. Imagine how freeing that would be, how liberating it would be to just let that get deep down into your soul. There's a sense in which pleasing people, approval seeking of people, there's a sense in which it's a form of idolatry. Because we fear that we may not be enough, even though God has said you're enough. I may not be lovable, even though God has said you are loved. And so it substitutes the opinions of others for the opinions of God. And it doesn't do it like it does it in subtle ways. It doesn't say, choose me or choose God. It says, choose God and me. Choose God and this dysfunction. And so what happens is that it becomes kind of this slippery slope. You know, you laugh at a joke that you probably shouldn't have laughed at because you want to be part of the group, or you tell a lie to save face, or you exaggerate a little bit so that you'll look just a tiny bit better because you want other people to think highly of you rather than lowly of you. And we think it's harmless, right? No harm, no foul, no big deal. But the thing is that actions have consequences. And sometimes they're unintended, like the inability to speak up when you know you should speak up, but you know that if you speak up, it's going to rock the boat, and nobody likes the person that rocks the boat, and so you decide to keep quiet. This came up for me this week in a way that was kind of subtle, but I want to share it because I think it was right on target with this sermon. So I was in a meeting with 3 other men and a woman. We were all colleagues. Everybody's a pastor. And the woman in the meeting was sharing something pretty heavy. She's from Hong Kong, and she was sharing some of her fears for some of her relatives who were on both sides of the conflict going on there. And she was talking about there's a video where one of the protesters gets lit on fire, and there's all these kinds of things. And she was just worried about her family in Hong Kong. And so it was a very serious kind of thing. And within 10 or 15 minutes of that sharing, and I know this happens so often, and I know it can be oversensitized, but within just a couple of minutes of the sharing, and these are all 4 of the other people that were in the meeting are a little bit older than me. And so part of this is generational. But 2 of the men proceeded, and we're all colleagues. This is a professional meeting. 2 of the men proceeded to try to flatter her by commenting on her looks. One of them said, "Oh, you never seem to age." And it's intended as a compliment, but it's a professional setting. Guys, don't do that. The other, they were talking about a conference that they had both spoken at. The guy spoke one year and the woman spoke the next year. And he was saying, well, I don't know about the content, but I know they got a better looking speaker when you were there than when I was there. And I started to get uncomfortable. You know, and it's one of those it's subtle enough where it's hard to know, like, where do you stick your foot in? And I don't know if she was offended by it. She may have been flattered by it. But I know we were in a professional context and it was inappropriate. Like, that's okay at the bar. It's not okay when you're sharing prayer requests with colleagues. And here's the conversation that went on in my mind. If I speak up, I'm going to risk offending these 2 guys. If I speak up, I may raise an issue for her that she wasn't even feeling. If I speak up, I'm going to get labeled the oversensitive one. And I'm not going to get their approval anymore. If I don't speak up, I may miss an opportunity to correct a wrong. If I'm seeking the approval of the other people in the room, I'm going to keep to myself. If I'm seeking the approval of God, then I'm going to, in a non-anxious way, say, hey, I'm uncomfortable with that. My question to you this morning is, how often do you keep quiet because you're worried what everybody else is going to think? How often do you do something in an attempt to impress people that you wouldn't, that out of that context, and if it weren't for the impressing of other people, that you'd be a little bit ashamed of yourself for, that you may not want broadcast in a video in the sermon? How many of us struggle with that? If you struggle with that, I want to emphasize what Proverbs said, because I know it's true from personal experience. If we seek the approval of people, it will prove to be a snare. But if we seek the approval and put our trust in God, it will prove to be a blessing. God has approved of you already. Let that sink deep into your soul. He died for you. He loves you. There's nothing that can change that, even if the whole world hates you. Will you join with me in prayer?